Hello and welcome to our short tutorial on the different types of pins that are available and how to pin your fabric together. I really hope this tutorial is going to help those of you that are new to sewing and that are actually trying to get used to the pinning motion. So I'm going to show you how to do this and the different types of pins that are available and those that you hopefully will want to use. So let's look at the different pins that are available and their uses. We'll start with steel dressmaking pins. Now these come in a variety of different lengths. Again, I personally prefer the longer length and they are fabulous because they're super cheap. However, some people find that because they don't have such a head on the top of it, they can be difficult to work with. They can also be easy to lose. The other option really is to go with a headed pin, and I personally prefer the glass-headed pins. The glass-headed pins and the steel pins can be ironed on, however plastic pins cannot because obviously they may melt. So when it comes to the glass-headed pins, you've got a couple of different lengths. This is the standard length, and this is what you would use instead of the steel pins because these are the same length. I personally find that I prefer using pins with a head when I'm working with fabrics that have a loose weave. They're easier to find in the fabric. They're also nicer maybe if you're working with a finer fabric because you've got a little bit more control over it, or if you're prone to potentially dropping them on the floor. Obviously these are easier to see with the coloured tops. Now they come, as I mentioned, in different lengths. So this is a longer version. And one thing I would say about these, they're not something I necessarily use that often. However, I have found them to be very, very useful for beginners that are potentially learning to sew and learning to pin. The longer pin gives you a little bit more room to put it through the fabric, so they have found them to actually be really useful. So if you are new to sewing, I would maybe recommend getting yourself some longer pins to start with until you get the hang of the pinning motion. The other option, and another set of pins that I use rather regularly, are these pins, and these are again glass-headed pins, but these are very, very fine and therefore they're suitable for silk, lace and other fine fabrics. You would find that you would bend one of these or potentially break it, putting it through something thicker, but if you're working with silk or something that might scag, these are your go-to pins. So it's always handy to have a little box of these around. There are lots of choice and it really depends on the budget that you're working with and the fabric that you're going to be using. So let me show you how to actually pin fabric. Now you're going to position the pin and you're going to position it into the fabric. So we're going into the fabric, then we want to bring it back up out of the fabric, and you can see what I'm going to do here is I put my left hand in front of the pin to act as a lever and to pull the fabric taut underneath that will allow me to lift the pin up. So I tend to always position my pins in horizontally to the seam that I'm sewing, and I would always pin on my stitching line if possible so that I know where I'm going to be sewing and that it's holding everything in position where it should be. So say I was sewing along this edge of the fabric here, I would pin close to the edge of the fabric. Again, see I'm using my left hand as a lever. There we go. And I would pin all of my pins in this direction. I would also think about how I'm going to be sewing. So I would start sewing here so that as I'm traveling down, my pin head is facing me. That makes it easy for me to take the pins out as they're coming out of the machine. Now there are many methods of pinning and it really comes down to personal preference. This is just how I prefer to do it and I wanted to share with you in case any of you were struggling with the process. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. Thanks for watching.